Breaking right now, Lucy Letby's best friends continue to stand by her. And at the Thirlwell inquiry, we have so much evidence emerging from the head nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital, Dawn Rees, that in fact they all believe in Lucy Letby's evidence. So let's look first at Dawn Howe. I think this is really important to show. It was released by the BBC after Letby was found guilty. But Dawn Howe is Lucy Letby's best friend. And she makes it very, very clear that not only was she going to stand by Lucy Letby, but so was the entire friendship group.
Have all of Lucy's friends stood by her?
Yes. We know she couldn't have done anything that she's accused of. So without a doubt, we stand by her. I've grown up with Lucy, and not a single thing that I've ever seen or witnessed of Lucy would, let me for a moment believe that she was capable of the things she was being accused of.
You seem utterly unshakable on this, but isn't it possible she's fooled you all?
Unless Lucy turned around and said, "I'm guilty," I will never believe that she's guilty.
And then this week, we had Karen Rees, who was Lucy Letby's boss, speak to the Thirlwell inquiry, and as part of that evidence, text messages emerged showing that she had supported Lucy Letby throughout.
That group with Karen Rees and 2 others. In 2017, Rees told her, "Hang on in there, girl. Your nursing team are fully behind you." In 2018, she wrote, "Happy New Year to you all. Lucy, I hope we get closure this year. I'm really proud of you. The professional way you've presented yourself throughout is admirable. We'll continue to support you."
Do you think, looking back, you got too close to Lucy Letby and her position?
I think the answer to that is yes. I was looking at her and she kept crying and saying, "Why are they doing this to me? I've done nothing wrong. I am not going to let them run me out of the job that I love." I was witnessing the anguish, she was absolutely, it was hard to keep witnessing that week in, week out.
You've got multiple nurses in the last 2 or 3 weeks who've come forward and said that, they stand by Lucy, they support Lucy. I can't think of the name. There was another nurse who on about Wednesday or Thursday of last week was interviewed and said the same thing.
Well, surely it's extremely significant that it was not just Karen Rees, but it was all of the nurses standing by Letby. Now, let's just think about this, Scott. If they genuinely thought that there was any chance that babies were being murdered within the hospital that they worked in by one of their colleagues, they're not going to stand by that person, are they? Because they're going to be absolutely terrified about the blame somehow being passed on to them. So again, I think it's something that's underestimated, the support that Lucy received from her fellow nurses. Although I note at the Thirlwell inquiry, the KC was trying to make the point that Karen had almost become too close to Letby somehow.
Well, there's also a requirement for both the doctors and the nurses within their professional standards and ethics that requires them, it's a legal requirement, that they have to come forward at any point if they suspect anyone is doing anything to harm a patient, especially an incapable patient, a minor or somebody who's, say, unconscious. So, this idea that they wouldn't, if they thought for a minute, if you thought for a minute that somebody was harming somebody in your unit, you would immediately speak up, you'd immediately come forward, you'd find somebody. Yet, we're given this sort of misleading idea that, well, only these 1 or 2 doctors had the information and that they were, somehow for 2 years ignored about it.
And the thing is, Norman, let's just be honest about this, right? We know how many issues there are systemically within the NHS. We know how many issues there were systemically at this hospital. So surely I'm not a conspiracy theory to suggest that it may have been much easier for certain senior doctors to try and pinpoint a nurse rather than actually look at why this hospital was failing so badly in so many areas.
Well, exactly. And of course, that is something that, a number of people have raised that as a possible explanation for this whole case. It's interesting. Incidentally, something I didn't mention is who wasn't considered to be included in the chart, the notorious chart, were any of the doctors. So it was only the nurses. It wasn't the doctors or any other of the auxiliary staff. So you've got that. I'd just like to have one other important thing that we haven't discussed about this whole case is that in the second trial, which was the trial of baby K, wasn't it, Scott? The second trial, the jury were told, so that was just considering the murder charge against Lucy Letby for baby K only. The jury was instructed that they were able to take into consideration the fact that Lucy Letby had been convicted of 6 murders in her first trial. Now, if that isn't inviting classic confirmation bias, and I was always on the understanding that previous convictions were not supposed to be, given as instructions to the jury to be taken account of. It was kind of inevitable, given those instructions, that she was going to be found guilty of the murder of baby K.
In legal terms, we call that propensity evidence. And in most other jurisdictions that follow the English legal tradition, propensity evidence is not allowed during the trial. Propensity evidence, say in Australia or New Zealand, gets considered during the sentencing portion at the end. So you've got to have been found guilty first. Unfortunately, here in the UK, there does appear to have been a change to the way that propensity evidence works. And so it is possible for the prosecution to bring forward propensity evidence if they can demonstrate that the propensity evidence from your previous conviction makes it more likely that you will have done this particular crime. The issue with that here is that the prosecution, it was the first thing they led. So they didn't lead a prosecution against her and then add the fact that, look, we've already prosecuted her 6 months ago for these other ones. They led with it as the very first sentence out of the prosecutor's mouth, which means that from that very minute, that's all the jury heard. Guaranteed their ears will have switched off and they'll have gone somewhere else.
Of course. And that is before you get to, I guess, my area of specialty, which is the mainstream media, and the fact that every single juror already walked into that courtroom thinking that they were going into the case of the angel of death or nurse death, which is just another factor. But Scott, look, in your role as lecturer in digital technologies for health at King's College London, you do a lot of work within the Faculty of Nursing, Midwifery and Palliative Care. And you have extensive training in law and nursing. So you know a lot about how nurses work and about their psychology. You have obviously also witnessed Letby up close in terms of the evidence, the videos that have been released. What's your take on her as a human being and as an individual? And do you think she had it in her to murder babies? Just talk to me a bit about your understanding of Lucy Letby, the person.
So, in regards to nursing, I completed 2 years of training and two years of clinical training within hospitals quite a while back, but it's still relevant to my job today. When I look at some of the evidence that came out, especially some of the clinical evidence that sort of misrepresented things that even I know aren't how things work, and then you look at how Lucy responded to some of that evidence, and how Lucy was in general. So I've seen the comments in the last couple of days in the media of one of the, I think it was a BBC reporter, or it might have been a Daily Mail reporter, suggesting that because she had a flat affect and looked a bit dour, that meant that she must have been guilty from day one. Well, no, you've got to remember, by the time she got to court, she'd already been about 4 or 5 years into being interviewed and harassed, and her house being searched, and her garden being dug up, and her gutters being drained, and all sorts of things. She'd already spent a considerable amount of time in custody. By that point, psychologically, she had to have been stunned. And so a flat affect which is the term that we use to say when somebody is showing almost no emotion. That flat affect is totally expected. I would expect nothing less. She's sitting there, she's stunned, she's hearing all this, she can't believe it's got to this point. So, you've got to remember what she was hearing in court. She probably already read in the documents, because in every case a witness there'll have been a will say statement or something that was presented by the prosecution during discovery to the defense. So she already had a fair idea what people were going to say, what they were going to accuse her of, how it was going to go. And she's sitting at night alone in a jail cell and then being dragged into court every morning by bus. Her demeanor was entirely, and the few times that I went to see the trial, her demeanor in the courtroom was entirely what I would expect for somebody who already knew what she was being accused of, already knew that, was probably told by her defense counsel that, the outcome wasn't going to go in her favor. And so she's sitting there as the world passes her by.
Yeah, big time. And of course, her parents went to the trial every day. Do you think that's also why Scott, in the end, she didn't show up for the sentencing and for the reading of the victim impact statements? It was just too much for her?
I think part of it was the fact that a lot of people forget that she'd already had received her verdicts for several of the charges, I think about 2 or 3 weeks prior. So the jury came back on the charges for a couple of the babies very quickly and then deliberated for 2 or 3 weeks. So it was already a foregone conclusion that, it was fait accompli. She was already guilty because they'd already found her guilty. And so by the time you get to the sentencing, it's like, well, it's not going to change anything. And I think that this idea that they should have dragged her, some people have suggested they should have dragged her, forced her on the bus, dragged her to the courtroom, made her sit there with her hands cuffed, listening to it all. Well, she'd already listened to it all. She, like everybody else, had already spent more than 10 months listening to it all. I can quite honestly sort of see the fact that she had no emotion left. And it's not that she didn't care, it's that she was at that point a husk.
Yeah. So can I ask you both how, looking at the evidence, looking at the case in its totality, how you think those babies died? But first, best time of year, isn't it? Football is back, Premier League in the UK, NFL Sundays in the US, college football Saturdays. With that comes the glorious grind of fantasy football lineups where your inner manager comes alive. But listen, while you're over here making sure your fantasy team is dialed in, don't let your personal grooming become the guy that gets left on the bench. My advice to you is that nobody wants to fumble their grooming routine. So, if you're a bloke, you need this, I promise you. And if you're a wife or a girlfriend or a mum, this is the perfect present for the man in your life. Manscaped's Performance Package 5.0 Ultra. I love it. It's an all-in-one grooming playbook, from keeping things sharp down below with the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra to taking care of those rogue-era nose hairs with the Weed Whacker 2.0. These products will help you feel clean, confident, and ready to dominate your fantasy league. So, the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra Groin and Body Hair Trimmer is your franchise player of your grooming roster with precise trimming capabilities. It's reliable, efficient, and gets the job done without fumbling. Whether it's for date night, a weekend tailgate, or just everyday grooming, this is the tool you want on your squad. Now, no one wants a surprise nose or hair making a guest appearance on game day or date night. So the Weed Whacker 2.0 handles those details like a pro, keeping you neat and ready to go. No missed tackles in your grooming game. The Performance Package 5.0 doesn't stop at grooming essentials, though. It comes with 2 free gifts, which is really exciting. There they are. The Boxes 2.0 Midnight Bravo and the Shed 2.0 Toiletry Bag. premium gear to ensure you're always ready for action, whether at home or on the road. So join the 10 million men worldwide. I'm one of them who trust Manscaped, and get ready for kickoff by heading over to manscaped.com. All you need to do is when you check out, just enter the coupon code Outspoken at checkout. You will get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. Trust me, you'll be drafting the real MVP of grooming this season. So 20% off and free shipping. You just need to use the coupon code Outspoken at www.manscaped.com. Stay on top of your grooming game. Be ready for anything the season throws your way.
I think I'll fill this one first from my perspective. So when I started to look at the various clinical evidence and the testimony, those people who follow my Substack, I run a Substack called Law, Health and Tech.
Yes.
Will have seen very, very quickly that I identified what I believe, and what we're now seeing from the Thirlwell inquiry, the evidence is coming out, that what I believe was the guilty party. And that guilty party stemmed from that one little bit of defense evidence we did get, and that was the evidence of the plumber. When we look at the fact that we're talking about a very old building, it was a building that had 50-plus-year-old lead pipes, and lead pipes are very well known for the fact that over time they pit. So you end up with these tiny little microscopic holes through the lead as it breaks down. And so, very, very small sprays of particulate from the pipes can spray out. In particular, in the room where most of these babies passed away, there was a pipe that ran diagonally across the roof above the false ceiling. Now, that pipe in particular was one that we know from the testimony of the plumber, and we know from the Datex records, was one that was replaced. And eventually, when they did replace it, they replaced it by putting it along the wall to one side of the neonatal unit, rather than as it had been diagonally across the middle. Now, at the same time, it appears they replaced components of the sort of drop ceiling that sat above. I would reasonably suspect that they replaced those tiles of the drop ceiling because it probably had spray from the pipes on the tiles. Now, you're talking about a pipe that was above several of these incubators. So every time you're opening one of these incubators, there's the potential that aerosolized particles could get into that incubator and settle on the baby. At the same time as well, we had evidence a couple of weeks ago of a report that demonstrated that the management knew that there was a plumbing issue, and they knew that there were infectious agents on the unit. At the same time, we've also got evidence from that period that Countess of Chester had one of the worst responses to sepsis in the country. They were in something like the top 3 or the top 5 for the worst responses for sepsis. They had sepsis through several of their important key clinical areas like intensive care and the neonatal unit. On top of that, now we've had evidence in the last few days that they were aware that there was an issue, and they rated it as a high issue, and they rated it as an issue that could seriously impact public opinion about the neonatal unit, that there was Pseudomonas aereus in all of the taps, apparently, bar one. So you've got the fact that the nurses, when they go to wash their hands, they're washing their hands in a sink where the water faucet is putting a bacterial agent that is deadly to these babies on their hands. You've also got the fact that quite often they'll be washing components, and one of the midwives pointed out to me in the last couple of days when I showed her the evidence behind that report. She said, you do realize that they're probably washing the breast pumps that the mothers were using to express breast milk under those taps. So that means you go and wash the breast pump, and you wash everything up, you put it out, you dry it, and then the next mother who picks that component up, that's already in there. Now, the interesting thing about what I looked at right at the start of this case with regards to these bacterial agents, the interesting thing is that these agents are the sort of agents who, even when they dry onto a surface like that, they can create a film, and we call it a biofilm. That biofilm can be touched, transferred, and is still active for all intents and purposes. So it means you then transfer it. So you've got it on your hands, you open up the incubator, you maybe change the nappy of the baby. So on top of the fact that you've got this Pseudomonas from the tap, when you change the nappy on the baby, you've also got whatever bacteria is in their fecal matter that's in the nappy. That often what would happen, and there's video of this, the nurses will pick the nappy up and they'll put it at the end of the incubator while they put the new nappy on the baby. The problem with that is that you've then also got the bacteria, which, you can have Acinetobacter and other bacterias that end up inside the incubator. You've got a baby who's laying in that incubator with tubes that go into their umbilical cord. So they're going directly into a blood vessel that then go within 4 inches into their heart. So you've got like a highway. You haven't just got this subtle chance like you might have if you've got, say, an IV on your arm. You've got a highway directly to the heart.
And the point is, there's an explanation.
And that explanation, the symptoms, the symptoms of that explanation fit with more of these babies. So we know that Acinetobacter and Pseudomonas can both cause that sort of mottling appearance that some of the babies have, right? We know that from, there's more literature suggesting that it can be caused by sepsis and a thing called NEC, enterocolitis. There's more evidence that it can be caused by that than there is that it can be caused by introduction of air into a blood vessel. And you've got the fact that for almost all of these babies, sepsis is queried in their medical records. For several of the babies, the mother was being treated for infection, or the mother had a temperature at birth. And if the mother has an infection or a temperature at birth, you must treat every baby that came out of that mother as if it is also infected. Okay, so there's evidence all the way along for every baby that at some point these babies were treated for suspected sepsis or a diagnosis of sepsis or a diagnosis of NEC. Several of the death certificates say sepsis and NEC. You've got the fact that there were other children who came into that unit at the time who were then sent out and treated at other hospitals like Liverpool Women's Hospital. They were treated for infection and brought back to the unit, got reinfected and had to go out again. Okay. And then to top it all off, there's evidence within the clinical notes to show that often what was happening was the doctors in the delivery unit, so the paediatrician who would receive the baby in the delivery unit, would query sepsis and start the treatment protocol, which is you initially give a bolus of antibiotics that's meant to be followed by 3 to 5 days of antibiotics when they get to the neonatal unit. There's evidence for some of the babies that the antibiotics weren't given in the neonatal unit. And in fact, that the doctors they'd get from delivery unit to neonatal unit, and the doctors in the neonatal unit, the same doctors who testified against Letby, would go, oh no, let's cancel those antibiotics.
That's a mess.
There's of course one other important causal potential causal explanation other than these types of bacterial or other infections, and that was that this was an understaffed, poorly resourced unit, and that they were treating babies who were already at very high risk with a very high probability of a natural death anyway.
Or most likely a combination of the two. Okay, so final question. What should happen now? Should there be a retrial? Should the conviction be quashed? I mean, what should happen in your personal view, Norman?
Well, obviously, I feel that there should be a push for another appeal. I was speaking to the lawyer Mark McDonald, was it? McDonald, the other a couple of weeks ago, and he was, he is now the one being apparently responsible for getting the evidence together with a view to, I guess, appealing to the Criminal Cases Review Commission. I have to say, I'm not very optimistic about that, because I actually worked with Mark on submitting a case to the Criminal Cases Review Commission on the Ben Geen case, and we got together a number of different professors of maths and statistics in that case, but that was, the attempt to get an appeal through them was unsuccessful.
Yeah, indeed. What about you, Scott?
I think that because I sat down literally at his kitchen table about 2 months back with David Davis. And I think what we need now is for politicians like Mr. Davis to step up and actually have these current convictions overturned and returned back to the court. Because as Norman says, as it stands at the moment, really, the ability for appeal, it's almost like it's been, deliberately closed in front of her. And the Criminal Cases Review Commission, in all fairness to them, have limited resources, a limited amount of investigators, and are not likely to have the ability to put the time into putting all of this together. And while ever at the moment it stays in the realm of the people like Norman and myself and other mathematicians and doctors and so on who are questioning it, without the fact that, now at least Mr. Davis has stood up and to be counted, without that the drive coming from Parliament to turn this over, I don't think it is going to get turned over in anything sort of short of the next decade.
No, and I guess that's why it's important that we keep talking about this. And it has been such a pleasure to have both of you on Outspoken today, for me to talk for the first time about my personal views on this. I needed the best experts in the business. I got them. Norman Fenton, of course, mathematician at Queen Mary University. He focuses on the probability of coincidences and clusters. And Dr. Scott McLachlan, a lecturer in digital technologies for health at King's College London, specifically though in the division of digital health and applied technology assessment within, crucially in this case, the Faculty of Nursing, Midwifery and Palliative Care. So thank you both so much, and we will obviously keep in touch as developments in this case progress. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are. You can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and I've put some of the links in the show notes below this video. Keep watching our Outspoken clips to support this independent news venture with no spin, no bias, and no censorship, unlike the MSM. Most importantly, I promise to keep fighting for you.